Super, donc bonjour à tous. Je suis ravie d'être là aujourd'hui pour débuter cette série de conférences qui va porter sur le lien entre les changements climatiques et l'impact social qu'ils peuvent avoir sur les inégalités. Euh, Donc, je me présente, mon nom est Marianne-Sarah Saulnier, je suis professeure associée à l'IREF à l'UQAM. Je suis aussi chercheuse postdoctorale à l'Université McGill où je m'intéresse à l'impact différencié des changements climatiques, mais cette fois-ci plus particulièrement sur les migrations climatiques. Je vais avoir l'occasion d'en parler dans une conférence future. Euh, donc, la série de conférences commence aujourd'hui avec Jen Gobby, donc ça commence en grand. Jen, pour aujourd'hui, juste pour vous dire, ça va être une rencontre qui va être bilingue, c'est-à-dire que nous, Jen comprend super bien le français, là, donc on peut lui parler en français sans problème, mais pour que se sente plus à l'aise de parler vraiment plus naturellement, elle va répondre en anglais. Mais je sais, Jen, que tu parles quand même assez bien, fait que si jamais il y a un problème, je crois pas que ça devrait être un enjeu. Mais donc voilà, c'est pour vous donner une petite idée de la formule. Ce qu'on aimerait beaucoup aussi, c'est que ça soit pas pour aujourd'hui vraiment une conférence très formelle avec une longue présentation de 30 minutes, 30-40 minutes et une série de questions. Ce qu'on aimerait, c'est que la discussion soit rapidement ouverte. Pour vos questions. Donc, Jen va faire une présentation d'environ 10 minutes. Puis ensuite, moi, je vais avoir des questions et puis on serait très heureuse si vous pouviez tout de suite vous lancer dans des questions vous aussi, afin vraiment de stimuler la prochaine heure à travers toutes sortes de sujets qui vous intéressent et des questions auxquelles vous voulez des réponses. Donc, sans plus tarder, je vais présenter Jen. Alors, Jen, c'est une activiste et puis elle est aussi professeure adjointe affiliée à l'Université Concordia. Elle a terminé son doctorat à McGill en 2019 dans le cadre d'un partenariat économie pour l'Anthropocène. Son travail se concentre surtout sur la compréhension puis le soutien des processus de changement transformateur vers une justice environnementale et climatique. Elle est l'autrice du livre More Powerful Together, Conversation with Climate Activists and Indigenous Land Defenders. Elle est aussi co-autrice du récent rapport Decolonizing Climate Policy in Canada. Elle est la fondatrice de Mud Girls Natural Building Collective, puis c'est aussi la directrice du Research for the Frontline, une initiative qui relie les communautés puis les organisateurs de première ligne de la lutte pour les changements environnementaux avec le milieu de la recherche. Donc aujourd'hui, Jen va avoir l'occasion, entre autres, de nous en parler. Donc, sans plus tarder, Jen, je te laisse commencer à présenter un peu de quoi tu vas nous parler.
Thank you, merci. Thank you all for being here, and thanks for your patience with my English. So in the big picture, what I want to talk about today is how research can support transformative change towards climate justice and environmental justice. This is what I think about all the time, and I've put a lot of thought into it, so I want to share a bit about that. The talk was called Unlearning Extractivism because research itself has a long history of being extractive whenever sort of there are collaborations with communities, impacted communities, Indigenous communities, other marginalized communities. There's a long history of extractive colonial relations. And so if we're going to think about what doing research in service to transformative change and in service to communities that are leading transformative change, we need to be really thinking about our practices and how we can move towards practices of accountability and reciprocity and away from relations of extractivism. So that means a lot of rethinking power, which I'm sure you're all used to thinking about. So I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to talk for a little while. That's not that. Here, I'll go to slides. And I'll talk a little bit, maybe for, like Marianne said, for about 10 minutes. And then I'd like to discuss with you all. So at the center of all the work I do, whether it's activism, organizing, or research, this is at the heart of what I think about all the time. So the 2018 report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change concluded that preventing climate catastrophe will require rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society. So I see this as the big challenge, because transforming all aspects of society at an unprecedented scale is not something we've done before. And so there's a lot of questions of how we do that. I'm really interested in how research can support transformative change. We know that governments and industries that are not interested in transformative change, at least not towards climate justice, have huge budgets for research and PR, but the movements leading these transformative efforts are not so well funded and supported to get their analysis out into the world. And so I think research can have a huge role to play. But like I said before, research is a site of ongoing colonial relations. So this is true for a long time in history, and it continues to be true today. So a Maori scholar, Linda Smith, in her seminal work on decolonizing methodologies, wrote that academic research is an institution that is embedded in a global system of imperialism and power. And with it has come new waves of exploration, discovery, exploitation, and appropriation. It is to such an extent that the word research is probably one of the dirtiest words in the Indigenous world's vocabulary. So we need an understanding of the complex ways in which the pursuit of knowledge is deeply embedded in the multiple layers of imperial and colonial practices. And then Aziz Chowdhury, who is a prof in education at McGill and a huge proponent of the intellectual work that goes on in movements, said that social change is driven by ordinary people organizing, learning, and creating knowledge together. I believe in the importance of the learning and the radical imagination found in movements as a vital conceptual resource for changing the world. So I share that worldview and that commitment to really supporting this kind of intellectual, brilliant work that happens with folks that are out there on the front lines, either facing the impacts or leading the resistance or the solutions that are needed for addressing climate and environmental justice. When I started my own PhD, when I started doing research, I felt really drawn to all the different climate and environmental justice movements across Canada, especially the ones led by Indigenous people. I did a lot involved with anti-pipeline organizing here in Quebec and as well in British Columbia. And really, I learned a lot. So a lot of what I know about climate change, about climate justice, about climate injustice, and about Indigenous sovereignty and Indigenous rights, I learned in these movements. Less so did I learn about these things at McGill. So a lot of what I do and know today comes from what I've learned being parts of these movements. And in terms of research, I've really come to think of research along two different spectrums, which I'll describe, and then I'm going to ask each of you where you see yourself on these spectrums. So at one end, research, and this is the sort of more conventional approach to research, I think most common still, is that research is led by researchers, by researchers in universities. Researchers make all the decisions and accrue most of the benefits and credit. This may include human participants as objects of research, and especially in social science and health research, but the decisions get made by the researcher in the university. And then over the last several decades, there's been a move towards participatory action research or engaged research or collaborative community engaged research. And here, researchers seek to work with communities or movements to do research together, but often it starts with the researcher's interests or fields of knowledge. And then they make decisions together through the project, and the benefits and the credit tends to be shared. And then, more recently, there is a move to research that is actually led by the communities or movements themselves, the people who are most directly impacted by whatever social or environmental issue is at the heart of the research project. Sometimes with the support of academic research partners, the project is based on community movement interests and goals to address the challenges they're impacted by, and the decisions are made by those folks, and the benefits and the credit goes to them. So, my slides have frozen, so hold on a sec. I'm just going to stop sharing for a minute. Now I'm going to show you the other axes, and then I'm going to ask you where you see yourself. So the other axis is between knowledge or information oriented or action oriented research. So there are some types of research that are really meant to just generate knowledge. It could be knowledge that eventually is going to lead to something, policy change or some kind of solution. But there's also research that tends to be more focused on action. So like participatory action research is the most common one of those, but where you're thinking about, okay, let's try some interventions and meant to benefit whatever it is we're trying to address. And then let's study the impacts of that. Let's study what worked, what didn't work, and build on that so we can take additional action based on that learning. So I myself, when I started at university, I only knew about the paradigm of doing researcher-led research involving trying to generate new knowledge. But as I got towards the end of my undergrad and starting my PhD, I started to learn a lot more about action-oriented and more collaborative processes. And during my PhD, I've moved across the spectrum. But I'm curious now if each of you would like to share with me where you see yourself, if you're a researcher. I'm not assuming you're all researchers, but maybe you are, where you see yourself on these two axes. Marianne, do you want to start to get us going? Not to put you on the
Oui,
spot.
bien sûr, je peux casser la glace. C'est vraiment super intéressant. Moi, quand j'ai commencé à ma maîtrise, j'étais clairement complètement à gauche. Donc, comme toi, en fait, Jen, comme tu l'as mentionné.
Oui.
Et puis, ma thèse de doctorat, elle est basée vraiment sur la recherche-action participative. C'est vraiment ce que j'ai fait sur mon terrain. Mais je dirais que moi, ce que j'ai vécu, c'était difficile de transformer la théorie en action. T'sais, à travers mes recherches, c'était beaucoup dans le besoin de partage d'informations qui impliquait aussi beaucoup d'un point de vue éthique, là, d'anonymisation des données, ce qui fait que pour moi, c'était difficile de passer nécessairement à l'action. Je pense que c'est quelque chose qui vient après un certain temps dans la recherche. Donc, moi, je dirais que je me situerais au milieu, donc dans la recherche-action participative, la collaboration, liée quand même avec un mouvement féministe là, qui était de plus en plus grandissant auprès de la communauté que j'avais en Inde. Donc, je dirais que je suis comme sur la ligne là, qui est horizontale, vers bleu, mais davantage vers le haut. Je dirais que c'est comme ça que je me situerais pour l'instant.
Bon,
Ouais,
merci.
un petit peu plus vers la théorie, ouais, exactement.
OK. Comme ici, peut-être?
Ouais, exactement. Avec un désir d'aller davantage vers le bas, parce que vers l'action davantage.
OK.
À travers mon postdoc, là, je travaille vraiment plus sur des actions concrètes pour les changements climatiques, sur l'impact différencié des changements climatiques, mais pour mon doctorat, c'était clairement plus dans la théorie.
OK. Cool, merci. Quelqu'un d'autre veut partager? Vous êtes sur cette map. Catherine, oui.
Bonjour, merci. En fait, moi, c'est peut-être plus une question qu'un partage, mais je suis à la 2e année du doctorat, donc c'est encore tout nouveau pour moi. Puis en fait, je m'intéresse au paradoxe qui existe entre la logique de gestion de projet et la logique de justice climatique féministe en contexte de coopération internationale. Plus particulièrement, je m'intéresse surtout au contexte plus précis entre le Canada et le Bénin, pour plusieurs raisons, là, et puis, je me demande comment est-ce que dans un cadre universitaire, toujours doctorante, donc étudiante, pas chercheuse, donc pas vraiment libre en tout cas, avec des contraintes institutionnelles qui, selon moi, m'empêchent de faire du community ou movement-led project. Donc, je me demande comment, selon vous, naviguer. En fait, moi, je souhaite vraiment complètement tendre vers le community movement-led. Pour moi, c'est super important. Puis, dans le cadre de ma thèse aussi, je m'intéresse à, en fait, comment les paradoxes qui existent un peu entre la théorie et la pratique. Donc, je me situe comme un peu partout sur le spectre d'en haut et en bas. Donc, c'est ça, je me demande si vous avez des conseils ou des choses que vous aviez déjà remarquées dans d'autres projets, ou est-ce qu'il est possible de peut-être contourner ces structures institutionnelles, si on veut, pour tendre vers, du moins, le community movement-led.
Yeah. Marianne-Sarah, do you think I should answer that now, or should we ask other people and then I'll answer it later? Or...
En fait, c'est une super bonne question, Catherine, parce que justement, c'était dans mes questions à poser. Donc, excellent. C'est sûr et certain qu'on va y répondre. Mais peut-être qu'on on pourrait peut-être juste faire un petit tour pour voir si d'autres personnes voulaient peut-être répondre à où ils se situent sur la ligne. Puis c'est certain qu'après, on va répondre à ta question, Catherine.
C'est parfait.
Donc, est-ce qu'on a quelqu'un qui veut se mouiller, dire où est-ce qu'il se situe? À ce moment-là, Jen, tu veux-tu répondre à la question?
Sure. So I do definitely see that within the academic world, we're very much pushed to stay over here, to stay in the researcher-led and knowledge or information-oriented paradigm. But there has been more and more, I think, acceptance and understanding of the importance of moving along these lines, especially as the urgence of climate change is asking for way more work that's contributing to the world outside of academia. And as we try to engage with more communities, especially those most impacted, if those communities are communities that are already very marginalized, then we need to be, and I think the academies know, even people within universities know that we have to be very careful about the power relations in those collaborations. So if we want to collaborate, we need to be sharing power or redistributing power. So I think like the ethics review processes are moving towards that understanding. So I think more and more there's space within academia to do these things. If you want to be over here, like way down in the very purple corner, where you're doing work that is completely at the service to communities and movements and really action oriented, then I think you might want to find ways to do that outside of the academy, because when we were working at universities, there's so much pressure to publish. There's so many constraints with what's fundable. There are so many constraints with how you can share funding. Like with SSHRC, the Social Science Humanities Research Council makes it very hard to pay community-led researchers for the work they're doing. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of constraints. And I'm going to tell you a bit about Research for the Front Lines, which is an organization I started completely outside of the university to make lots of space for being at this far end of the far purple end of the spectrum, so that we don't have to fight for our right to allow to do research that's in service to people outside of the academy. We can just do it. So I would say there's a lot of room in the center here, and there's more and more room being created all the time. But if you really want to do stuff, I think finding ways to use your research skills, perhaps on a very part-time, a couple hours a week, as a volunteer, you can have a lot of impact, as opposed to just like struggling to do that kind of thing within the academy. That's what I would share. So just before I go on to sharing a bit more about how I've moved through these and what that research is looking like, does anyone else want to have any questions or want to share anything about their reactions to this axis, or where they see themselves on it?
Moi, je dirais juste que ce que je trouve intéressant, c'est que pour avoir intégré la recherche-action participante dans mes recherches, j'ai vu que, tu vois, c'est intéressant parce que toi, tu le places vraiment au milieu. Donc, comme une avancée, mais c'est pas encore complètement à l'autre côté du spectre. Alors que moi, comment ça t'est reçu quand je suis arrivée avec l'idée de la recherche-action participante dans mes recherches en anthropologie, une thèse qui était très classique, c'était vu comme vraiment surprenant, puis comme vraiment très différent, comme quoi l'idée de pouvoir aller davantage vers le community movement-led research, c'est encore plus... La barrière est quand même assez éloignée, je trouve, face à la recherche traditionnelle qu'on fait en ce moment, là.
Yeah.
Donc,
I think there's some interesting loopholes where we can work around the university systems. Like Deborah McGregor, who's an Anishinaabe professor at York, she was giving a talk once that I was listening to about decolonizing research. And she said the most important thing you could do is think about who's determining your research questions. So most of the time when we're doing research, even if it's about inequality, even if it's about these big social ecological crises of our time, we're still creating the questions. And the questions may not lead to new knowledge that is particularly relevant to anyone, or it might be really disconnected from the lived realities of people impacted by these crises. So there's something you could do, which is just like develop a relationship with a movement or a community of impacted folks and really ask them what research questions would benefit them for you to spend 4 years answering.
Mm-hmm.
And then you could still do the typical, you could do the literature review and the interview, whatever your methods are. You could still do a very conventional research project for your master's or PhD. But in the end, the results, your thesis, the findings are a lot more likely to be useful on the ground if the research question has been determined by people on the ground. So that's a very small thing that can have huge implications, but doesn't have, but still fits nicely into the academic model. Yeah. Okay, I'm just going to share a bit more, but again, my slides have frozen, so just bear with me.
Puis pendant que tu te prépares, j'ajouterais aussi que ce qui est bien avec cette façon-là de voir la recherche, c'est que ça facilite beaucoup aussi l'orientation du chercheur, puis ses recherches, puis son analyse, puisque en étant en collaboration sur le terrain, en s'assurant que le sujet de base soit vraiment pour et par les gens qui participent, ils vont vraiment faire partie de l'analyse, puis de vouloir participer aux conclusions, ce qui fait que ça facilite vraiment aussi notre regard quand on analyse. Les données sont pratiquement analysées sur place alors qu'on est avec les gens, ce qui fait que ça rend même la recherche vraiment plus facile. Là.
Oui, yeah. I would say underlying any collaborative, participatory, or community-led approach, building relations of reciprocity is the most important thing. And it opens up all kinds of possibilities that if you don't take that, it tends to not be so possible. So I wanted to share that the work I did for my PhD, what I did was just in being part of the climate justice movement in Canada, I did crowdsource my research questions. And then I did then go ahead and conduct a big series of interviews and surveys with activists across the country, sort of like a collective reflection on what's working, what's not working in the movements, sort of strategizing together about what would make us stronger, how we could work together better across different parts of the movements or different movements. And so I think this project could be considered one of those things where I crowdsourced the research questions, then conducted it myself, did the analysis and writing myself, and then shared it back. But so my thesis came out in book form, which Marianne-Sarah mentioned, but as an effort, so that the book is like 300 pages and costs $29. So I was sure a lot of the people that I was writing for with the audience in mind wouldn't have the time or necessarily the money to do that. So I made a 30-page summary of the findings of the research in a PDF form in English and French. It's on my website if you're interested. But as a way, sort of an executive summary for activists, understanding that a big book is not accessible to many people who are very busy on the front lines. So that was an effort I made. And just to share that some of the questions I asked folks in those interviews was I asked like many different people their theories of change and then got to map them all together. And this has led to a lot of good conversations. Another effort I did to be beneficial is in the literature I conducted on theories of change from within academic literature. I distilled these down to 8 lessons for activists from like 100-page literature review. So I was really trying to render all that labor for my PhD into very like immediately accessible and useful stuff. So I would say that by the end of my PhD, I was coming towards that center place where I was moving more towards action, more towards engaged, but I was still leading my own work and conducting my own projects. And then after I finished my PhD, I found out I got a 2-year postdoc from SSHRC. And at that point, starting from scratch again. And a lot of what I had learned in my PhD was about the problem with the ongoing power imbalances within the movements and how these are rendering us less transformative than we could be. And so I had this clear sense at that time that if I wanted my postdoc work to be most useful, it was time to let the question be determined elsewhere. So I contacted the Ariel Deranger, the executive director of Indigenous Climate Action, and I said, I have 2 years of funded research. What can I do for you that would be useful? And she said she'd been a long time meaning to do a big critical analysis of federal climate policy, and could I help with that? And so I said, sure. So together we designed a project which I supported, and now we're on the second phase of the project, and etc. So that led to the Decolonizing Climate Policy in Canada report, which is available online. And then we also put out another report recently on the risks and threats of nature-based climate solutions. So these are all ways like that I built this great relationship with ICA because I offered my services. And I was able to offer them labor because I had found my own funding. So that was interesting. And so there I had really moved across the spectrum. And now I was doing work that is the decisions are being led. So I made no decisions about the methods. I made no decisions about how the research would be shared. I didn't determine the research questions. I just provided labor, building off the skills I had and you know, on policy analysis and interviews, etc. But then by the time my postdoc was over, I was interested to know what else was possible. What else, how could research, even outside the university, be conducted in active solidarity and support to communities on the front lines of these crises? So I started an organization called Research for the Front Lines. And I did it because, so while I was involved with lots of movements, which I still am, I had come to understand that movements and communities do have very real research needs, but they don't have the time to conduct that research. At the same time, while I was in universities, spending a lot of time there, I came across people all the time who would love to do research in collaboration with Indigenous communities, other movements involved with climate justice, but didn't know how to build those relations or even to start. And so I thought if we could create an organization that does that matchmaking, that creates the networks, that brings communities and researchers together to create research teams that then conduct research together at the service of those frontline folks, then that could be something great. And so that's what we did. And now we're in our second year. So the service we provide is we connect grassroots communities and movements that are on the front lines of the fight for environmental and climate justice with researchers like ourselves who have time, skill, and labor to offer. And we establish and support collaborations that challenge extractive colonial capitalism and promote just, flourishing alternatives. So some of the things we do is like we work with the frontline folks to discuss like what it is their research needs and try to really come up with a plan together. And then we coordinate a network of researchers who are offering their skills. So volunteers sign up to offer time with us. We provide training for researchers about community-led and decolonial research methodologies. We try to do a training about once every month or two. We try to provide a rigorous high-quality research output. So we try to ensure that all the research that's getting done by volunteers is high quality and rigorously done. And we also try to ensure that the collaborations between the volunteers and the frontline folks are really effective, respectful, and always serving community and organizer needs and objectives. So we have three kinds. I'm going to go quickly now so we get lots of, yeah, so we have lots of time for questions. But we have three sort of types of folks we work with. So like I mentioned, we work with communities. So we're with communities and movements that are either impacted by climate impacts or impacted by the causes of climate change. They're like unwanted oil and gas, unwanted mining projects, etc. So all the research projects start and end with them, and they make all the decisions throughout. Then we work with a large pool of volunteers. So in the last year, we've collected a beautiful long list of 100, I think we're up to 105 volunteers from universities across Canada. From undergraduate to graduate to postdoctoral, even we have maybe 4 or 5 professors who are on our roster who offer their time on different projects. And we also have a pool of people who are our research mentors who may not have the time to volunteer on a project, but they've made themselves available for us to just pick their brains as needed. If, for example, there's a method they're really experienced or knowledgeable about that we want to maybe use, and they'll sit down with us and give us guidance. They'll sit down with the research team and provide suggestions. So again, these people are volunteering their time. So in the last year and a half since we launched, we've established and supported 17 different research collaborations that's supporting in the service of 17 different community groups or movement groups. We've gathered over 100 volunteers. We have a good team of research mentors. We've mobilized over 3,500 hours of volunteer so that has the word hours twice in it, but 3,500 volunteer hours, organized 4 trainings, and published 2 full-length articles and 4 reports. So we have a bunch of different projects on the go, but to give you some ideas, we did investigative research on the police violence at Fairy Creek. Also another one about police violence at Wet'suwet'en Territory. We've been involved with helping a mapping project exposing environmental racism across Canada. We supported an Indigenous delegation that was preparing for COP26 2 years ago with a bunch of material that they wanted to get together before they went. We've been helping an Indigenous climate research team analyze big survey results, so just offering some analysis labor. We did research about the Canadian Pacific Police and their structure and jurisdiction for a land defender from Amjadong First Nation who had been targeted by them. And more. One of our big projects was about this investigative piece about the Community Industry Response Group, which is an arm of the RCMP that exists in British Columbia, that is paid by tax dollars to enforce industry-led injunctions on Indigenous territories. So a land defender from BC had been seeing these Kurg guys everywhere in Wet'suwet'en and Fairy Creek blockades, wondering who they are, could not find any information online. So came to us and we put a team together, and with that land defender and the team conducted a bunch of research and then put out these 2 articles that came out in Briar Patch, exposing the Kurg as a deeply unjust institution. We've also been working with the Anishinaabe folks in and around La Vérendrye Park on a very big project around protecting the moose in their territory. So this is some pictures from last March when we all met together to start to design the research project. And then in November this year, after incredible amounts of work by both the Anishinaabe Moose Research Committee and the research teams, the research volunteers. So over 35 research volunteers worked on this project alone last year. This report was launched in November, aiming to convince the Quebec government to extend the moratorium on moose sport hunting in and around La Vérendrye Park. So this is an example of the kind of work we do. So this is all led by the Anishinaabe folks, mostly coordinated by Shannon Chief, who is an Anishinaabe knowledge keeper. So this is a great example of the work can get done, and the amazing work can get done led by community folks, but with the support and allyship of settler researchers. And so now where I find myself is outside the university. So I still teach at McGill, I still teach at Concordia, but the rest of my time I'm devoted to research for the front line. So I'm able to do the work at this fully purple end of the spectrum, where I'm finding it really amazing and really exciting, and I'm excited about work going forward. So I wanted to share that. I'm going to stop. Oh, did I have anything else? Oh yeah, I did want to share that in order to try to ensure that research relationships are not extractive, are respectful, are reciprocal. We do have a list of guiding principles and things we ask our research volunteers to commit to in order to make sure that we are transforming the power relations and not replicating the old extractive relations that typically characterized research for the last hundreds of years. So these are some of them, and I'd be happy to share them in more detail if anyone's interested or wants to talk about any of these more. And then if anyone wants to get involved, sign up as a mentor or sign up as a research volunteer, I can put these sign up links in the chat. And yeah, that's all I wanted to share with my slides. So I'm going to stop sharing and see if there's any responses or questions.
Ben, moi, déjà, à la base, je dirais juste que je trouve que le projet est vraiment incroyable. Honnêtement, c'est le genre de projet pour lequel, déjà, juste instinctivement, je serais vraiment heureuse de participer. Là, je trouve ça vraiment incroyable. J'ai des petites questions par rapport à ça. Comme par exemple, je me demandais, comme là, vous avez fait des rapports. Est-ce que vous sentez qu'il y a eu un espèce... Est-ce que vous avez des exemples de success story, par exemple, qu'il y a eu une écoute de la part de dirigeants qui sont davantage dans des positions de pouvoir, comme par exemple le gouvernement? Ou est-ce que vous sentez que ça a eu un impact concret dans des politiques publiques ou des projets comme ça? Une écoute?
Two of the projects we supported in Quebec last year made it to the APTN's 10 historical firsts of 2022, which is a big thing they put out, a video came out where the APTN, listed these 10 different firsts that happened in Quebec, led by Indigenous folks in last year. So 2 of the projects, the Moose project we were involved with, made it to that. And so did another project we were involved with, which is the Genestantsera, which are a group of Mohawk matriarchs, Mohawk mothers, who were really concerned that there were unmarked graves of Indigenous children under the Royal Victoria Hospital at McGill. And so wanted McGill to stop the construction there until the study could be done. So they took McGill and the construction proponents to court. They did not want to be represented by a lawyer. The Mohawk women did not want to be represented by a lawyer, and they wanted to argue based on their own laws, not Canadian Quebec laws, and they won. So we helped them. They led their project, but we helped them with a bunch of background archival research. So digging through archives, we had about 5 different volunteers in Ontario and Quebec going through archives from decades and decades and decades of archives to search for evidence for the trial. And then they not only won the case, which is a first in Canada, where an Indigenous group in court represented themselves based on their own laws and won an injunction case. C'est la première fois. And they only not only won, but the judge said that there had to be a study. So the construction would stop. There had to be a study that would be completely paid for by McGill, but all the decisions would get made by the Mohawk mothers about how that study took place.
Wow.
Yeah, ça c'est un good news story, no?
Oui, vraiment.
Yeah.
C'est incroyable. Wow.
Yeah. Now we just helped with a small piece of that. The Mohawk mothers can get all the credit for that huge win. But we supported as best we could with the archival research. But yeah, I was impressed by that.
Vraiment. J'ai plein d'autres questions, mais avant, j'aimerais peut-être passer la parole dans la salle s'il n'y a pas quelqu'un d'autre qui aurait une question à poser qui lui vienne. Non, ben à ce moment-là, ah oui, super, oui, Axel.
Bonjour tout le monde. Moi, je suis au doctorat en administration en RSE et je suis au début aussi. Là, j'entame ma 2e année comme toi, Catherine. Et puis, je m'intéresse au projet minier de la transition énergétique et donc évidemment l'extractivisme, mais dans un autre type d'enjeu, mais qui est quand même finalement qui se rejoint pas mal aussi. Et donc, moi, je suis pas dans le milieu de l'activisme, etc. Mais je trouve ça super intéressant et je trouve qu'effectivement, faire ce lien-là entre la recherche et comment est-ce qu'on peut en fait avoir une recherche qui est utile et qui est finalement... Pourquoi est-ce qu'on fait de la recherche? C'est quand même pour que ça serve à quelque chose et pour que ça serve aux communautés, je pense que c'est quelque chose qui est vraiment passionnant. Donc, c'est clairement vers ce genre de choses-là que je veux m'orienter, mais je suis pas du tout là pour l'instant. Donc, c'est pour ça, tantôt, je savais pas où me positionner sur le graphique, là, parce que ça, sans doute que maintenant, je suis plutôt en haut vers la gauche, là, et que j'aimerais bien migrer un peu plus ailleurs aussi. Et donc, super intéressant, la Research for the Frontline, je ne connaissais pas, mais c'est vraiment passionnant. Et je pense que quand j'aurai un petit peu plus de temps, c'est clairement quelque chose que j'aimerais faire, parce que je trouve que c'est vraiment ça, vers ça qu'on doit tendre en tant que chercheur. Moi, j'avais une question, peut-être un peu cheveux dans la soupe, là, mais justement, dans les projets miniers de la transition énergétique, quand je commence à regarder un peu plus au niveau de la presse, etc., puis on parle très peu des communautés autochtones, alors qu'en fait, elles sont vraiment très impactées, évidemment. Donc, c'est clairement quelque chose qui, dans mon terrain, va être central et que je veux qu'il soit central, contrairement à d'autres études qui vont, surtout en administration, on a plus tendance à étudier les entreprises, etc. Donc, j'aimerais que ça fasse partie de ma recherche, sauf que pour l'instant, j'ai aucun contact avec des membres des communautés. J'ai pas encore été dans les terrains non plus, donc ça viendra peut-être progressivement. Mais comment est-ce qu'on fait justement? Puis je suis mère de 2 enfants, j'habite près de Montréal, donc je suis pas physiquement là-bas. Donc, comment faire une recherche qui peut inclure vraiment des gens mais en étant finalement éloigné? Est-ce que c'est pas un doux rêve qui est de toute façon pas atteignable, ou est-ce qu'il y a moyen d'arriver à concilier comment est-ce qu'on se lance un peu dans ce genre dans ce genre de défi, d'arriver à inclure les communautés vraiment de façon, justement pas l'approche d'une chercheuse qui vient pour expliquer comment ça se passe, essayer de comprendre et en retirer de l'information, mais d'une façon beaucoup plus collaborative, mais sans avoir de passé activiste et d'ancrage dans les milieux. Là, je ne sais pas si c'est clair, mais...
Oui, c'est pour ça. I think that there's so many, different ways. Like, so in this moment of incredible convergence of crises and the urgency, I feel like the days of studying movements or studying, like, where researchers study some, like, I think that's got limited use at this point of urgency. I think it has use sometimes, but there are so many, like, for example, the Front commun pour la transition énergétique, which is a network of environmental groups in Quebec. Like, I think they have like over 70 or 80 grassroots and non-governmental organizations and unions that are part of this Front commun. They work with researchers often, and they have research needs, right? But they're all busy, like, campaigning, organizing, working with communities. They don't have tons of expertise or time to spend on research. So, like, even if you're interested in energy transition, just contacting them and say, hey, I'm a researcher, open to, shaping my research project around something that would be useful to you. I think they would throw a million questions at anyone who offered that, because they have a lot of different research needs. One of my colleagues at Concordia right now is doing some research for them on like modeling economic degrowth in Quebec and scenarios around that. And he happens to be like a economic modeler, so that was easy, But I'm sure there's examples like that where you don't have to necessarily have existing relationships, and you don't necessarily have to have a collaboration where you, like, talk to each other all the time and collaborate on everything. It could be more like, hey, got some ideas for research that would be useful. But I think, just in general, the idea of thinking about, like, there's other things you could do too, like taking a stance at when you're doing a literature review for your PhD or something, not just including academic sources, but including sources written by people most impacted by whatever issue, or people most experienced with the most lived experience on the issue, even if it is administration or whatever, like reading things written by administrators, not just by academics who write about administrators, So I think there's, like, these subtle moves we can make about whose knowledge we're valuing and whose movements we're serving or whose visions we're supporting. Yeah, I guess whatever comes up.
Thanks.
Moi, je serais curieuse de savoir, pour avoir, en anthropologie, on sait beaucoup à quel point, les anthropologues sont pas si le bienvenu là, dans des recherches auprès de communautés, principalement à cause du rapport de pouvoir qu'il y a souvent eu, le lien colonial, des recherches qui ont été faites qui n'ont pas respecté les communautés. Ce qui fait que ce qui revient beaucoup en recherche, c'est la méfiance que les communautés ont envers les chercheurs. Moi, toi, clairement, ta démarche est tend à aller dans un autre spectre complètement de la recherche, mais je me demandais, de ton expérience, comment tu as créé ce lien de confiance-là? Est-ce que tu sentais qu'il y avait déjà une certaine réticence à ton arrivée quand tu as commencé tout ce projet-là? Puis comment est-ce que tu l'as créé, le lien de confiance?
Yeah, that's such a huge thing. So most communities, marginalized communities, have been over researched. They have consultation fatigue. They're being contacted by all kinds of organizations looking for, like, their involvement or whatever. So there's a real fatigue and mistrust. And even, like, with Research for the Front Lines, all the collaborations folks it's happened through word of mouth. We haven't done any formal outreach. And I think if we just went to communities and say, hey, we offer this service, they would assume that we're trying to do research, our own research, and involve them somehow, because that is the research paradigm that they have been, that have come up against over and over and over again. So I think with Research for the Front Lines, one thing that's really working is we're extremely clear. We don't do any of our own research. Like, some of the volunteers do their own research in their own time, but everyone who's working on Research for the Front Lines, we're not doing our own research. We're only doing research and providing research labor on research projects directed by frontline folks, and they make all the decisions. So those two things right away flip the power imbalance that is usually characteristic of research. So we try to make that clear, very, very clear. But then the most important thing, like beyond what you say, is actually how it plays out in reality. So as we're providing services that are useful for folks, they're letting other communities know, and communities are coming to us, you know? So there is the need to actually build up the reputation of actually doing research in service to, and sort of, yeah, creating this other understanding of what research can be. But for myself personally, when I was doing my research and my PhD, people were willing to talk to me, like the people I interviewed were willing to talk to me because I had been doing activism. So they already had heard my name because I've been involved with climate organizing. I've been doing a lot of activism that had nothing to do with my research. I, you know, was showing up on Indigenous blockades and supporting, like doing dishes or moving firewood or whatever. And I didn't do that so that I could, you know, build trust, so that I could do relationship building and research. I do it because I believe that activism is where the power lies, and so I wanted to contribute to that. And then when I reached out to people for my research, there was some initial trust there, or at least familiarity. And then when I went to start research for the front lines, I already had relationships with existing activist-led offenders and Indigenous communities, not all of them, some of them. And so that's where the collaborations began, and they're sort of folding out from there. But yeah, I think like actually starting any relationship by supporting the community or the movement's own projects, events, goals, and building relationships that way, and then saying, hey, I got this thing, you think it could be of benefit. Yeah.
Parfait. Est-ce que quelqu'un aurait une autre question? Sinon, j'en aurais peut-être une dernière, là. Je vois qu'il nous reste un petit peu moins que 10 minutes. Jen, alors quand on s'est rencontrés, on a fait une petite rencontre pré-conférence, puis on a parlé un peu du lien que les femmes entretenaient avec l'environnement. Puis Jen, tu m'as laissé entendre qu'il y avait énormément de femmes qui s'impliquaient. En fait, que particulièrement des femmes qui s'impliquaient dans la cause pour l'environnement autour de toi. Je me demandais si tu peux parler un peu de ça, voir un peu qu'est-ce que tu vois justement des femmes qui s'impliquent. Pourquoi tu penses qu'il y a autant de femmes qui s'impliquent par rapport aux hommes? Donc, c'est ça, j'aimerais t'entendre un peu là-dessus.
Sure. J'aime cette question. So I am a feminist. I did in my 20s, I started a feminist anti-capitalist building collective that is still going strong. So I definitely have a strong feminist politics. But when I was starting research for the front lines, I didn't intend for it to be a women or female-led thing. But what's come to be is that almost all the community leads on each of the projects are women. So the people who've come to us from communities looking to lead research are women, I think with the exception of one project that was led by a dude. And then also when I look at our volunteer list, I would say it's about 75% women. And then recently we've been putting together an advisory council of folks who are sort of representative of the communities we serve, to sort of to be the decision makers for the organization. So the community folks lead all the decision makings for a specific research project, but then for the organization itself, we're developing an advisory council. And it just happens that all the people we wanted to ask, we only realized it later, but they were all women. And so I think it's interesting that it hasn't even been intentional, but it seems like most of the people that we're bringing to the project and that are drawn to the project are women or people of gender diverse people. So I think it's I'm not sure what it means, but I think it might have something to do with openness to really sharing power, or the skills to really share power and decision making. I don't know. What do you think? What do you think? I don't know how to.
Ben, moi, je dirais, Oui, c'est un phénomène intéressant parce que ça se voit ailleurs. Tu sais, moi, j'ai dirigé la vie de recherche du Conseil des Montréalaises pour une transition écologique juste et féministe à Montréal. Jen, d'ailleurs, tu as fait la revue littérature, et on va recevoir les chercheuses aussi dans une autre conférence de cette série. Mais un des éléments qui a été soulevé à travers la vie à Montréal, c'est que il y avait énormément de femmes et plus de femmes qui s'impliquaient pour l'environnement. Principalement parce que les femmes, de façon générale, en raison de leurs tâches reproductives, en fonction de leur charge à la maison, entretiennent un lien vraiment particulier avec l'environnement. Euh, Principalement parce que c'est lié beaucoup au transport, celles qui vont souvent être associées à aller chercher des enfants à l'école, aller faire les courses, celles souvent qui vont se charger, tu sais, de faire des actions individuelles pour l'environnement, exemple, composter, faire des lunchs avec moins de déchets, par exemple, choisir des produits ménagers qui sont moins polluants. Donc, les femmes entretiennent dans leur vie quotidienne un lien avec l'environnement qui est beaucoup plus grand que les hommes en raison de leurs tâches reproductives, ce qui pourrait expliquer pourquoi il y a plus de femmes qui se mobilisent. T'sais. On avait eu aussi dans notre avis l'idée qu'il y avait beaucoup de femmes, surtout dans des milieux qui sont plus défavorisés, qui voulaient s'impliquer davantage, par exemple, dans des activités de verdissement, dans des activités de jardinage, mais elles n'avaient juste pas les ressources, entre autres parce que ça se rendait pas dans des organismes pour les femmes, alors qu'on se rendait compte qu'il y avait vraiment un besoin à ce niveau-là et puis qui était vraiment demandé de façon très directe envers les femmes. Donc, je dirais que ce serait peut-être une des explications intéressantes là, du lien qui explique vraiment la présence des femmes dans la cause environnementale.
Also, in a lot of Indigenous communities, the women are traditionally the water keepers or the water protectors. So a lot of the Indigenous community folks we're supporting, the women really take their responsibilities to the water, to the lands very, very seriously. So they're the ones that are maybe stepping up to lead these projects in their communities. That might be quelque chose aussi. Yeah.
Oui, absolument. Ben, c'est associé encore une fois aux tâches genrées, puis qui les associe avec l'environnement. Donc, super
I remember
intéressant.
in that literature review on gender and climate change, I remember also learning that there's like, again, not to be too gender essentialist, but that women tend to have more aversion to risk and men tend to be more comfortable with risk. And this is that's how some of the scholars are understanding the difference between pro-environmental behavior or like concerns about climate change, that those differences between men and women is that women have like, whoa, that sounds really risky. Let's do something about that. Let's take that action. Let's take care of ourselves and each other now. Whereas men are like, it'll be fine. Like just to have like more less risk aversion. So I remember studies about that we came across.
Oui,
so yeah.
Absolument. Oui, tout à fait. Oui, Mélodie?
Allô, ça va être rare que Jen m'entende parler en français. Mais oui, moi, j'ai une question vraiment très rapide. Tu parlais beaucoup de méthodologie qui était community-led, qui était community-oriented. Mais je me demandais par rapport à ce qui est aux résultats de la recherche, si tu connaissais, si tu avais expérimenté différents moyens de communiquer les résultats de la recherche pour qu'ils soient accessibles aux communautés qui ont participé à la recherche, ou même que ça peut servir aussi à d'autres communautés, parce que souvent, c'est des sujets de recherche qui peuvent avoir plein d'utilité pour différents mouvements. Okay, je me demandais peut-être une petite liste rapide de moyens de publication auxquels tu penses qui sont plus accessibles.
Yeah. Okay, so the least accessible, academic journals. Okay. Paywalls, no one reads them. So, okay. So, but on the other side, it is a super important question, Melody. Thank you for asking it. And I just wanted to share that that's another one of those constraints about doing research within academia is there's such a pressure to publish. If you're actually working with communities and then in the end, what's been found, they don't want to share, you're going to be in a real pickle if you have to tell your doctoral supervisor, we can't publish the work I've done for the 4 years because the community is not comfortable with publishing it. But if you're actually going to have a real collaboration, you need to respect their decisions to not share, not publish, right? So I would say always make sure that is very clear about how decisions are going to get made, about what is shared and how. But then once, it's a little bit off the topic, but Melody, we've been experimenting with different things. So like writing a report is one thing, like getting all the information and writing that as clearly and as accessibly as possible. But then how you communicate, how you get that out. So doing press conferences, like, and trying to get the main key is getting media attention so that media writes about it. So that seems like one key thing. But we've also been hearing the importance of actual verbal communication. So for the Moose project, the Anishinaabe Moose Committee, they're going around to all their different communities, 9 different communities in their territories, to share verbally, share in presentation what they have been learning about the state of the moose. So the importance of actual, like, personal verbal communication, so not just the written word. There's been lots of talk about doing things in terms of like creating little videos that share the snippets, like the main essences of what's been found in the research. That seems really useful. Also, I've been hearing great success stories about turning research reports into like graphic novels, or like little sort of more, that's a good way to, like, if your audience that you want to communicate with is youth, then of course, you know, doing, you know, being really savvy with social media couldn't really help. I'm a little bit bad in that area. Still old enough that I'm on Facebook. So yeah, so I think that's it. Like, there's a lot of ways, but I think that's something we personally are thinking about a lot and trying to figure out. And I think, to tell you the truth, I think getting some trainings on that, maybe from youth who are incredible at communicating things these days, and trying to get some guidance would help us serve communities better, and when we can offer more options of ways to communicate findings when they choose to.
Génial, c'est une super bonne question. C'est ici que ça va se terminer. Merci énormément, Jen. J'aurais 1 million d'autres questions à te poser. C'était super intéressant. Je suis certaine, je ne sais pas pour vous autres, mais moi, c'est sûr et certain, je vais t'écrire pour Research for the Frontlines. J'ai trouvé ça vraiment super inspirant. Merci vraiment beaucoup pour ta participation, et puis au plaisir de se reparler. Merci à tous pour cette première conférence. Merci pour vos questions super pertinentes. Oui. Et puis, on se revoit le mois prochain. Donc, passez une belle journée.